Mark was the kind of guy everyone loves. Too nice, too forgiving. The kind who wouldn't even argue if you maxed out the credit card or forgot his birthday. It's fine, he'd say, every single time. And I hated him for it. He was so damn accommodating, it made me sick. I didn't respect him, not really. But I played along because, well, why wouldn't I? He was my golden ticket, a life of comfort without lifting a finger. The worst part? He loved me. Completely. Enough to overlook all the red flags I waved in his face. I knew exactly how to keep him in line. A little guilt here, a little manipulation there. He'd do whatever I wanted just to avoid an argument, and I wanted everything. He worked long hours, but I made sure he knew it was never enough. We deserve better, I'd say, while planning my next shopping spree. And the best part? He never called me out. Not once. He let me walk all over him, and I didn't feel the least bit guilty. Why should I? If he wasn't going to stand up for himself, that was his problem, not mine. But then something changed. Mark started acting different, distant. He wasn't jumping to meet my every demand anymore. At first, I thought it was stress from work, but then I noticed the little things. How he kept his phone closer, how he smiled less. I should have seen it coming. I should have known that even the nicest man has his breaking point, but I didn't. And that was my first mistake. Mark's kindness was my greatest weapon. I didn't just use it, I exploited it. Every time he told me he loved me, it felt like I was holding a key to a vault, one I could open whenever I wanted. Take money, for instance. Mark made good money, steady, reliable income that always kept us comfortable. From the beginning, I insisted we keep joint accounts. It's our money, I'd say, and he believed it. Of course, our money meant whatever I wanted it to mean. New shoes? Done. Spa days? Absolutely. Designer handbags I barely used? Why not? And Mark never said a word. Instead, he'd smile and say, "As long as it makes you happy." God, it was infuriating. How could someone be so spineless? Then there were the jokes. Oh, how my friends loved hearing about Saint Mark. I'd tell them how boring he was, how he'd stay home and fold laundry while we went out for drinks. "He's too sensitive," I'd laugh, always loud enough for him to hear. Mark would just smile, pretending it didn't bother him. But I knew it did. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, how he'd quietly leave the room. It was perfect. He'd never confront me about it. And sex? That was another tool in my arsenal. Whenever I wanted something, a bigger vacation, a new car, I'd start pulling away. Subtle at first, then more obvious. When he finally asked what was wrong, I'd hit him where it hurt. "I just don't feel close to you anymore. Maybe if you were more—" That was all it took. He'd bend over backward to fix things, doing whatever I wanted, just to win me back. The best part, though, was the gaslighting. Mark was always so trusting, so easy to manipulate. When he asked if I was spending too much, I'd tilt my head, give him a pitying look, and say, "You're imagining things again. You know how stressed you get." And he believed me every single time. It wasn't just about money or control. It was about making him doubt himself, about reminding him that I was the one calling the shots, like the time he wanted to visit his parents for the weekend. "Oh, so I'm not enough for you?" I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell it. He canceled the trip before I even had to push. Mark's feelings didn't matter to me. Why would they? He wasn't ambitious. He wasn't exciting. He was just there. And I thought that was enough. Until it wasn't. It wasn't supposed to come out like this. Mark was never supposed to know about Paul. It wasn't even serious, just fun. Paul was everything Mark wasn't. Bold, confident, exciting. When I was with him, I felt alive. Like I was someone who mattered. Mark. Mark was safe, boring, predictable. Paul made me feel like I deserved more, and I took it. The affair started casually enough. Lunches here, a few drinks there. But it grew. Late nights at work, weekend meetups, endless texts that made me laugh in a way Mark never could. I never worried about being caught. Mark was too trusting, too wrapped up in his little world to notice. Until he did. I'll never forget the night he confronted me. It was late, and I was in bed scrolling through my phone when he walked in. His face was calm, but his eyes, they were different, harder. He was holding my phone in his hand. "I found these," he said, scrolling to an open text thread with Paul. My stomach dropped, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I smiled. "You went through my phone? That's pathetic, Mark. Who does that?" But he didn't take the bait. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. I laughed. A big, deliberate laugh, meant to humiliate him. "Oh, come on, Mark. Don't be so dramatic. It wasn't even serious. Paul's just fun. You know, something you've never been." For a second, I thought that would be the end of it. Mark never fought back, not really. He'd always let me walk all over him, and I figured this time wouldn't be any different. But then he did something I wasn't expecting. He stood his ground. "I need some space," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'll be sleeping in the guest room for a while." I blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" He didn't answer. He just walked out of the room, shutting the door behind him. I couldn't believe it. He was supposed to fight for me, to apologize for invading my privacy and grovel at my feet like he always did. He wasn't supposed to turn it around on me, wasn't supposed to make me the bad guy. I didn't like it, not one bit. Mark was changing, and it was throwing me off. He wasn't reacting the way I expected, and it made me feel unsettled. At first, I brushed it off. He was sulking. He'd get over it. But then I started noticing things. He wasn't home as much. When he was, he barely spoke to me. He stopped asking how my day was, stopped offering to pick up groceries or handle the bills. He stopped looking at me like I was the center of his world. It unnerved me. For years, I had been the one in control. Mark was my safety net, my ever-reliable constant. But now, it felt like that net was slipping away, and I had no idea how to stop it. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Fear. I couldn't let it end like this. Mark had always been the dependable one, the one who stayed no matter what I did. He wasn't allowed to pull away, not when I'd spent years shaping him into someone who'd never leave. So I did what I had to do. I fought back. And when I fight to win. The first move was simple. I drained the joint savings account. Every cent we had saved together, gone in one afternoon. A new designer bag, a weekend spa retreat, and a couple of splurges on things I didn't even need. Mark's reaction? Nothing, not a word. He just kept his head down, going to work like nothing had changed. It pissed me off. He was supposed to yell, to demand an explanation, to grovel like he always did. But he didn't. His silence felt like defiance, and I wasn't about to let him think he could get away with that. So, I turned to my favorite tool. Guilt. "You're a bad husband, Mark," I said one night, as he sat quietly in the kitchen. "You've never tried hard enough to make me happy. I've had to do everything myself in this marriage." He looked at me for a moment, then turned back to his plate. It was infuriating. "Do you even care anymore?" I demanded, my voice rising. "I've sacrificed so much for you, and this is how you repay me?" Still, nothing. Just that maddening silence. Next, I started spreading rumors. I told our mutual friends that Mark was controlling, that he'd always been emotionally abusive. I painted myself as the victim, the poor, misunderstood wife stuck with a cold, distant husband. Some of them believed me, others didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I was still steering the narrative, keeping Mark on the defensive, even if he didn't know it yet. But my favorite tactic, the one that really gave me the rush I needed, was flaunting Paul. I made sure Mark saw us together, at the coffee shop, at a mutual friend's party. Once, I even brought Paul to a restaurant where I knew Mark liked to have lunch. Mark walked in, saw us laughing together at the bar, and simply turned around and left. No confrontation, no scene. I smiled the entire night. I thought I was winning. But Mark was doing something I hadn't anticipated. He was planning. While I was busy spending his money and dragging his name through the mud, Mark was taking steps to protect himself. He met with a lawyer, quietly confided in a few trusted friends, and began documenting everything I was doing. I didn't know any of this, of course. All I saw was his calm, quiet demeanor, which I interpreted as defeat. Finally, I thought, he's giving up. Good, he needed to accept his place. I couldn't have been more wrong. Mark's silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. A quiet, unshakable strength I had underestimated for years. And it was only a matter of time before it would come back to haunt me. I should have known something was up when Mark insisted we go to my parents' house for Sunday dinner. Mark never liked making a scene, so I figured he was just trying to smooth things over. I wasn't worried. If anything, I felt smug. Mark's little rebellion was over, and this was his way of crawling back into my good graces. I couldn't have been more wrong. Dinner started normally enough. Laughs, wine, the usual. But then Mark stood up, cleared his throat, and said, "I think it's time everyone knew the truth." The room went silent. "For years," he began, "I've done my best to provide for this family, to support my wife, but tonight I want to talk about what that's cost me." And then he laid it all out. He started with the finances, how I'd emptied our savings account and left him with almost nothing, how I'd spent thousands on luxury items while refusing to contribute a single cent to our household. Next came the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the way I'd twisted every argument to make him the bad guy. He even had screenshots of text messages I'd sent to our friends, calling him weak and pathetic. Finally, the infidelity. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the evidence, texts between Paul and me, photos, even timestamps showing the nights I claimed to be working late. The silence was deafening. I lashed out. "You're pathetic, Mark," I snapped, my voice shaking with rage. "Only a vindictive coward would air our dirty laundry like this. Do you think this makes you look good?" He didn't flinch. He just stood there, calm as ever, while the rest of the room stared at me like I was some kind of monster. And then came the twist. "I've already filed for divorce," he said, his voice steady. "The papers are signed, the accounts are separated, and as for Paul," he paused, letting the words sink in. "He's no longer part of the business. I've taken full control." I felt the blood drain from my face. Mark had outplayed me, completely, and for the first time, I realized I might actually lose everything. It all unraveled faster than I thought possible. The morning after that disastrous dinner, Paul sent me a single, blunt text. "We're done." At first, I didn't believe him. Paul was impulsive, always saying things he didn't mean. But then I heard the whispers, how Mark had exposed everything to their professional circle. Paul's reputation was in ruins. Clients were pulling out of deals, colleagues were distancing themselves, and his name was being dragged through the mud. When I called him, desperate to fix things, he didn't even let me speak. "You're toxic," he snapped. "This isn't worth it." And just like that, he was gone. I thought I could weather the storm, but it only got worse. My friends, the ones I thought would take my side, didn't. They'd seen the evidence Mark shared and were disgusted. My parents were ashamed of me, refusing to return my calls. Even casual acquaintances turned cold. I tried to spin the narrative. I told anyone who'd listen that Mark was manipulative, that he'd set me up. But no one bought it. Every time I posted on social media, the comments flooded in. "You got what you deserved." Poor Mark. Karma's a bitch, huh? It was like everyone had turned on me overnight. Then came the final blow, the house. Mark refused to let me keep it. I fought, screamed, and tried to play every card I had, but he held firm. The judge sided with him, citing my financial sabotage and infidelity. I ended up in a small, dingy apartment on the edge of town. The ceilings leaked, the walls were thin, and the neighbors were loud. I hated it. But what I hated more was the silence, the absence of the life I'd once had. I had plenty of time to think in that apartment, and as much as I wanted to blame Mark, I couldn't shake the truth. He wasn't weak. He wasn't pathetic. He was patient. He'd loved me, truly loved me, and I'd taken advantage of that love until there was nothing left. And now? Now he was thriving while I was left to pick up the pieces of the mess I'd made. I wish I could say I was sorry, that I'd learned my lesson. But the truth is, part of me still can't accept it. Because admitting I was wrong means admitting that I lost. Mark is doing better than I ever thought he could. Better than I ever wanted him to. After the divorce, he rebuilt everything I tried to take from him. His business is thriving. He's landed deals bigger than anything he ever had when Paul was around. And his social circle? It's grown. The same friends I once used to mock him now invite him out for drinks and family barbecues. He's even started dating. I saw a photo of her once. Of her. Young, beautiful, glowing with the kind of happiness I used to fake. My stomach turned when I saw her arm around him, her smile so open and free. They looked perfect together, as if I had never even existed. He was living the life I always thought I deserved. And me, I'm stuck in this God-forsaken apartment, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and neighbors who can't mind their own business. It's not fair. I didn't mean for things to end this way. I didn't mean to push Mark so far. Sure, I took things too far sometimes. But he let me, didn't he? That's the part no one seems to get. Mark let me walk all over him. If he'd had a spine, if he'd stood up to me earlier, maybe we could have worked things out. Maybe I wouldn't have had to push so hard. But no, he let it happen, and now I'm the one paying for it. Sometimes, late at night, I think about everything I lost. Mark wasn't weak, not in the way I always told myself he was. He was patient, and I mistook that patience for something I could exploit forever. I thought I could keep pushing, keep taking, without ever facing the consequences. I was wrong, but even now, as I sit here alone, I can't bring myself to fully accept the blame. Part of me still believes he had a choice. He could have stayed. He could have fought for me. He could have forgiven me, just like he always did. Instead, he chose to leave. And now, he's happy while well, I'm here. Maybe he won. Maybe I deserved to lose. But deep down, I still can't help but think, it didn't have to end this way. If only he'd been stronger, or if I'd been weaker, maybe things would have been different. Maybe, but I guess I'll never know.